Hare Krishna. Welcome to our Bhagavad Gita discussions, Gita lessons and discussions, glad sessions. We have done the first session was on the first chapter. Then we spent a few sessions on the second, and now we are on the third chapter. We have done up to 16 verses in the third chapter. So I think since some of you are coming for the first time, we will just recap what we have done so far briefly. So the Bhagavad Gita begins with Arjuna's confusion. Arjuna expresses his unwillingness to fight the most important battle of his life. And it's ironical because Arjuna has never lost a battle in life. He's always been victorious. And before the most important war, he's unsure, he's confused. And then he starts giving different excuses for not doing his duty. He gives excuses like, he says, I'm feeling a lot of compassion for my enemies. And what's the use of killing them? It's better they kill me. And I think I'll become a beggar and go and, he starts giving crazy proposals which he can't do. He can't be a beggar. He's a Kshatriya, he's a warrior. And he says, let me go and beg. And he says, if I fight and, then all the soldiers will be killed and then the women will be unprotected and then there will be unwanted children. And then, he goes on a, Spiral. And then he is finally so confused. And then he says, Krishna, I don't want to fight. And he sits on the chariot. Now, when you have a boxing match, two boxers, if you want to start the fight, you stand up. That's the first thing you do. And here he has this Gandiva, his acclaimed bow, which is like very powerful. And he had taken a vow that if anybody tells him to throw off his Gandiva or is not qualified to hold that bow, he'll kill that person. He had such a sense of identity with that bow. And now he puts that bow down and he sits on the chariot, forlorn, melancholy, not wanting to fight. So that's how Bhagavad Gita begins. So many readers since time immemorial have connected with Arjuna's dilemma because we all are put in situations in life where we just we can't do what we have been doing all the time. Something happens to us. We get cold feet. कुछ तो हो जाता है, हम confused हो जाते हैं. क्या करना है, क्या नहीं करना है. So basically, we may be free as in a democracy, but individually, internally, we may not be free. We are bound by our fears, and Arjuna represents that. निकाल लाया हूँ एक पिंजड़े से परिंदा. निकाल लाया हूँ पिंजरे से एक परिंदा. अब उस परिंदे के दिल से पिंजरा निकालना बाकी है. We may be free, but there is a cage inside. So Arjuna is an archetypal imprisoned by his own mind. So in the last 5 sessions, we have discussed in great detail about the working of the mind. We did some exercises to improve our awareness of the mind. We discussed the Panchakoshas also. So I won't be doing all of that now. But if you're part of this group, you will eventually, we'll keep coming back to these topics again and again. So that's how the first chapter ends. So the second chapter is where the Bhagavad Gita discussions actually start. And in the second chapter is when Krishna starts speaking the knowledge of the Gita. And for all the participants, to help them remember the Gita, we gave an acronym for each chapter. So you can go back and tell your friends that you studied the second chapter of Gita. And if they ask you what is the essence, you can always tell them an acronym. The second chapter can be remembered with the acronym Gita, Gita. The first G stands for Guru. Krishna refuses to give instructions and wisdom to Arjuna. He keeps chastising him, scolding him for his unwillingness to fight. And only when Arjuna stops giving excuses and he says, Krishna, I don't want to have friendly discussions with you. I'm actually tired of giving excuses. I just surrender to you. Shishyasteham sadhimam tvam prapannam. I just want to understand. I accept you as my guru. And that's when Krishna starts speaking the Gita. And there we discussed how Gita is not an armchair philosophy. It's serious discussion. So the first few verses are about the importance of Guru. Then Krishna speaks the first wisdom of the Gita. That is Gita. I stands for identity. Krishna explains how I am not the body, but I am the soul. Just like there is a car, but the car runs because of the driver. Similarly, this body is functioning because there is a driver, Atman or soul. And just like this body has eyes, just like a car has a, horns and light and wheels, but the driver is the one who moves it. Similarly, this body is like a car. But just like we feed different food for the car and different for the driver, we can't say driver ko bhook lage, we can't tell him petrol thoda zyada dala hai gaadi mein, thoda tum pee lo या दाल बच गया डाल दो गाड़ी में. नहीं, गाड़ी का खाना अलग, ड्राइवर का खाना अलग. So we discussed about chanting, meditation, breathing, journaling as food for the soul and how we can connect to ourselves. That's identity. Then the third topic of the second chapter is T. T stands for two duties. We all have two duties, our Swadharma and Sanatan Dharma. We discussed about our duties towards the society that we live in and how according to our nature we engage in different duties. And then our responsibility towards our own self, the real I. So that was the topic that Krishna discusses with Arjuna. And the last is A, for lack of another equivalent English word, and to make the acronym very attractive. The A is a Sanskrit word called Atmaram, which refers to the quality of being self-satisfied. So Krishna speaks about Atmaram, or the person who is actually self-realized. What are his qualities? So this is the second chapter in essence, Gita. At the end of second chapter, the third chapter is called Karma Yoga, which is what we discussed. We began last time, 5 principles of Karma Yoga. So we discussed first 16 verses, and this chapter is very powerful because this is what makes spiritual life practical and doable. If spiritual life was restricted to temple visits or learning of Sanskrit or going to the Himalayas or elaborate rituals, then I think most of us would be disqualified from practicing spiritual life because we won't be able to do that. But Karma Yoga is what makes spiritual life very realistic. And therefore Krishna delineates systematically the principles of Karma Yoga in 3rd chapter as well as later in the 5th chapter. Both are called Karma Yoga. So in 3rd chapter, it's easy to remember the whole flow of the chapter with an acronym called TREE, T-R-E-E. The first T stands for Tyaga or renunciation. Now, I want to give a little background to spirituality. In traditional Indian spiritual circles, a spiritual path was synonymous with renunciation. It's basically, you get so much realizations that everything is temporary and fleeting and illusory that a person would very seamlessly and organically develop renunciation and leave everything. That's the path of jnana. So Arjuna, he's confused, because he's hearing Krishna speak contradictory things in the 2nd chapter. Krishna keeps telling Arjuna, stand up and fight. And then he also keeps saying, Buddhi Yoga, enrich yourself with knowledge. So traditionally, those who seek knowledge, spiritual knowledge, they develop so much renunciation after learning and realizing so much that they seamlessly leave everything and go to the forest. So Arjuna is thinking, no, traditionally renunciation or taking up saffron was a natural result of developing renunciation. You have a renounced spirit and then you actually go to the forest. But Arjuna, what he starts thinking is, well, it's a great idea to renounce everything. So he wants renunciation as a means. It's not an end for him. He wants to leave everything because he wants to avoid the fight. So he says, Krishna, on the one hand, you're telling me to fight. You're also telling me to pursue knowledge, but this is contradictory. So what should I do? But then Krishna speaks Karma Yoga. Krishna speaks how we can stay where we are. We can do our duties and still be a yogi. So the first principle he speaks in this chapter, the first principle of Karma Yoga, when he's speaking about Tyaga, he says the first principle of Karma Yoga is, anybody remembers? Work without attachment. And then we discussed in great detail how this sounds very utopian. I find it, initially when I read it, I knew there is wisdom here, but I couldn't understand because how can you work without attachment? See, if I'm not attached, then I'm not inspired to work. And if I take responsibility, then I get attached. If I'm not attached, then I won't take responsibility. It's very, very difficult to be responsible and not be attached. So if you remember last time, just 2 months ago, that's why I'm again summarizing this, because it's been a long time. For those of you who remember everything, please bear with me for repetition. So here's a very interesting thing. We are practitioners of Bhakti Yoga in ISKCON. So we have given a flavor of Bhakti to Karma Yoga. That's why Karma Yoga becomes very doable for us, because we practice working without attachment by getting attached to Ishvara or the Lord. So when we get attached to a person whom different traditions call by different names, Ishvara, universe, cosmic consciousness, Allah, whatever, Krishna, Rama, when we get attached to God as a person, then it becomes easy to work without attachment, because we are attached to a person, and when we are attached to a person, then we are not attached to the work. We are attached to Him, and then we are willing to adjust. That attachment helps us. So then we discuss how do we develop that attachment? By spending time with Ishvara. And I spoke about the technique of chanting. We discussed the meditation technique. We will also discuss that later if we have time. For chanting, remember, we all gave beats to everyone and we chanted. That was the first principle of Karma Yoga, working without attachment. So then in the third chapter, T-R-E-E, T stands for Tyaga. Then Krishna speaks about R stands for rungs of yoga ladder. So Krishna speaks how there are people who have no interest in spiritual life. They are called as karmis. They just work. And they say work is worship. Krishna denounces that. Krishna says work is not worship. If work is worship, even a terrorist is worshipping. He is also working hard. A bank robber is worshipping. There is more to worship than simply working. So Krishna explains rungs of yoga ladder. First, the lowest is a karmi, who is simply a materialist, who is simply working to gratify his senses. Higher than that is a person called karma kandi. Karma kanda is when we work, but we perform some rituals or puja, part and all of that. The idea is, I want to enjoy, and if I do these things, I'll be able to enjoy better. But the driving force is still enjoyment. That's karma kanda. Then begins sakama karma yoga, where we give part of the results of our work in sacrifice, in charity, or we do it for a cause. But majority is for myself. Then there is nishkam karma yoga, where we give most of our results away and keep just a little bit for ourselves. And then there is, by this practice, one develops little renounced spirit and one becomes a jnani, a realized person. That's jnana yoga. And in that stage, it becomes easy to do meditation and dhyana yoga. And then finally, one surrenders completely oneself to Ishvara. That is bhakti yoga. This was rungs of yoga ladder. T-R. Then the third is E. E stands for working as an example, which we will discuss today. And then the last E stands for eternal enemy of lust. How Arjuna is confused. He says, I know everything, but I can't practice karma yoga because of, I'm not able to do, despite knowing everything is right. Then Krishna speaks the power of lust, which we will take up next time. So the 5 principles of karma yoga explained in this chapter. The first principle is work without attachment. The second principle Krishna explains is work as an offering. And this we discussed how to make everything an offering. We discussed about how whatever you do, you can just translate that work or that activity as an offering to Ishvara. Like I gave an example. Somebody was asking a question about going to the gym. Last time, remember? Somebody said, I go to the gym, and then how can that be an offering? I said, you could always meditate that, okay, Ishvara, God, Krishna, I'm doing this workout so that I'm healthy, and with this good health, I can serve better. So I want to make this 2 hours of gym workout as an offering for your satisfaction. So like that, we discuss how we can make everything an offering. Like for example, I'm coming here. So when I go back, I have a small altar in my room. So I'll go, and then this has become kind of a ritual, but there is some emotion added there. I'll first offer respects, and then I'll say, Krishna, these last 4 hours, I was out of the temple. I went for a program. I gave a class on the Gita. I offer this to you for your pleasure. And I offer the results of this for you. So this is how this is karma yoga, where we do our work and offer the work and the results to the Lord. So this is the second principle of karma yoga. The third principle of Karma Yoga we discussed was Krishna speaks how working as a sacrifice. Like we give up something because we get something else in return. You pay your electricity bill, you pay your water bills, you pay your taxes, but there's something else you get in return. So then I gave a homework for this. I don't know if you remember. Anybody remembers? I said you have 2 months, you could practice it. I said, okay, how do we so I asked all of you to think about an experience which is uncomfortable for you. Anything which you know is the right thing to do, but it is uncomfortable, think about it. And then write. I gave an exercise, free writing, where you write what makes me uncomfortable and how can I transform that discomfort into an offering to Ishvara. So we can then, certain things will be revealed to us. Anybody remembers what is free writing? It's a type of journaling where we let whatever arises in our heart and mind, just we pour it down on the paper. So we practice. So if you have time, we'll do that today also. So these are the 3 principles of Karma Yoga we discussed last time. Is this clear so far? So we discussed the summary of the first chapter, second chapter, and third chapter, and the 5 principles of Karma Yoga. And the first 3 we have discussed. And now the 4th principle of Karma Yoga, starting from verse number 17 to 35, is where Krishna is going to speak to Arjuna. Arjuna, great! You have understood what is Karma Yoga. And now you may be so spiritually advanced that you don't need to do any work. You may have transcended all obligations to the world, but still do your duty as an example for the society. This is a long section, almost 18 to 20 verses where Krishna speaks. Now it's a very powerful section because generally, even if you do work, and even you develop all these spiritual realizations. There are some very famous karma yogis in India now. There's a difference between, and these people are working hard, and then when you ask them, you don't need to do. They say, yeah, but I'm setting a right example. So they're claiming to be following the footsteps of Arjuna, working as an example. Although you're not obliged to work. So here Krishna gives many examples. We're going to read some of the verses. You're going to repeat after me and then we'll discuss on this. So Krishna says, Arjuna, I don't have to work. I'm not obliged to work. But if I don't do my duties, the world will be put into ruination. So I'm doing my duty. Why can't you do your duties? So he gives his own example and then he gives a very powerful example. Krishna says, remember Janak Maharaj? Janak Maharaj is the father of Sita. So Krishna tells Arjuna, Janak was a very self-realized, very advanced, spiritually powerful personality. But he did his duties. Are you greater than him? Can't you do your duty? As an example. And then he says this famous verse, whatever great men do, common men follow. Yadyadacharati sreshtas tadat evetaro jana. Arjuna, set the proper example. So like this, one is hitting this point very hard. Set the proper example. So we'll chant a few verses and then we will do an exercise. Because maybe we'll chant the verses later. I'll just give an exercise because I know many friends of mine who tell me that, okay, it's very difficult to work, to set an example because at some point of time, I feel lethargic or uninspired to do what I'm doing. So how do I continue? How do I sustain my duties or what is good for me and for the society? How do I sustain doing something which is good? As an example. So for that, there is a concept which I would like to share now and then maybe we can take the verses. This concept is called focusing on values rather than goals. So this has helped me personally because I am living a life which can get very monotonous. Because every day morning, we have the same schedule. 365 days a year. And we don't have a holiday. So in fact, Sundays we are more busy. But since I learned this concept, it's helping me practice Krishna's instruction to Arjuna of working to set the proper example. What is the use of working to set the proper example if you are miserable within? You may be setting the right example, but you are miserable. So we need to be also happy, right, and fulfilled. So I learned this intuitively I knew that what should drive me is values. But the society encourages us to have goals. I'm sharing a very interesting paradigm with you. Please listen with an open mind. This reminds me, I'm thirsty. Intuitively, I knew that more than goals, we need values, but I didn't have any concrete evidence. And I shared this with one of my friends. He was is a very very talented person. He was IIT JE rank fourth rank, and then he got into Stanford and he has done his PhD from Stanford, and very intelligent, and he's a Hare Krishna devotee. So I was telling him, I know that goals-driven society, goals are not good, but I can't prove it. And then he laughed. He said, "Oh, there are plenty of studies we have done in Stanford and Harvard." And then he shared some of the studies with me, which have proved a lot of examples how organizations or individual at the individual level, when people focus more on their values, they achieve more success and they're more effective. So then I was satisfied with that report when I studied. So what I mean by values-driven value paradigm is you ask yourself what is really important for you. Value is derived from the word valuable. There is something which means a lot to me. So there's something which I hold very sacred. That's value. All of us have values. Some of us may not be aware that we have values. We may not be even aware, but subconsciously we are driven by some values. मेरे लिए बहुत ज़रूरी है ये. Something which means everything for you. Now, ask yourself, how is your life, how is your behavior, your activities? Is it aligned to your values? If it is, then you will be always fulfilled. If your actions are not aligned to your values, you will feel discomfort. Like, I'll give an example. One of my friends said, he's very unhappy in life. I said, "What are your values?" He said, "Family." I said, "Okay." And he works 110 hours a week. So I said, "Okay, he goes to his office, he works 7 days a week sometimes." And he says, "I'm not happy." I said, "What's the most important value?" "Family." And what is his action and behavior? It's not consistent with his values. Simple example. Okay, I'll give an example. When I joined the ashram, the value that is most sacred to me, sharing Krishna consciousness with others, sharing the knowledge of Gita. So I had a very special service. Every day afternoon at 1:30, I would go with a bag full of Bhagavad Gitas out on the street, in the local trains of Mumbai, distribute these books, sell them, preach, tell people about Krishna, about Gita. And I would come back at 7. Sometimes I would come back with empty bags. I would have distributed around small books I would take, sometimes 100 small books. And I would come back to temple feeling, like a batsman who scored a century and is coming back to the pavilion. I would be like so happy. And sometimes I would do 50, 30, sometimes even 20. But I would spend time talking to people, telling them about Krishna. And I would come back feeling fulfilled because those 6 hours were aligned to the principle of sharing and contribution. Contribution and community is one of the 7 sacred values which I hold very dear to my life. So I have got the 7 values put right in front of me on my notice board, in front of my table. Every day, morning and evening, I see what I did today. Is it consistent with any of these values? If yes, I know I'm on the right track. So I was doing this every day, 1:30 to 6:37 every day, going out. Life was aligned to my value. Then one day they made an announcement in the temple. Okay, we have the Bhagavad Gita Jayanti festival. So we need to distribute 3 lakh Bhagavad Gitas this month. So we need to have targets, goals. Okay, Vraja Bihari, you are a great book distributor. So you have to distribute 1,000 books this week, every week, minimum 1,000. I said, "Yes, bro." I was all for it because goals they give you a dopamine kick. You feel a sense of purpose. You feel a strong drive. I was excited. And then I realized I became conscious of the results. That experience, that is, achievement is different from experience. achievement is not the same as experience. I'm not able to explain it better, but so there's an experience of sharing Krishna. There is an achievement of getting so many scores. And I realized something is wrong. I'm not feeling fulfilled. So it didn't take me long to realize that I've shifted from values to goals. Then I saw one friend of mine who I knew was financially endowed, prosperous fellow. So I told him, why don't you sponsor 500 Gitas this week? And he obliged me. And I said, chalo, this week ka ho gaya quota. I achieved the targets, but dil hai ki manta nahi. There is something wrong in my heart. So goals are futuristic. They keep you always in the future. Values, they keep you in the present. And they help you live a life more fully. I'm not saying we don't need goals. Don't get me wrong. People go to the other extreme. Goals are very important. But I'm saying, if you are driven by values, we'll be consistently fulfilled and effective. Like that, okay, let's take a simple example. The two men, both working in the same office, both have a goal to get the promotion by next year. But as both of them are working hard, one fellow is desperate for the promotion and he's like, hook or crook, mujhe promotion chahiye. The other fellow also wants the promotion, but he's driven by his value of learning and growth. So he keeps his eyes and ears open. He's always learning something new. And he keeps coming back to his value. For the end of the year, he has learned and grown. And both of them don't get the promotion. The second fellow is happy because he still lived by his value. The first, because see, the result, when you're goal driven, the result is not always in your control. There are many factors which are beyond us. But if I'm centered on my values, there's a good chance that I may still be fulfilled, effective. So I want to do one exercise with all of you, if you're okay. We all have goals, so I don't want to discuss the goals with you, but I'm sure you also have values. So can you spend a few minutes maybe we have some time. So maybe we can make a group of 4. Is that difficult? हो सकता है ना? 4 लोगों का. The next 30 seconds में 4 लोग आप साथ में आइए. I'll give a very simple exercise for you. 4 of you, if you can be together. Just 30 seconds you have. Immediately. 4 लोगों का एक टीम बना लो बस. 4 लोग. Maximum 5, but 4 would be best. Okay, now all of you. So you know what is a value, right? And goals. So I want you to think of some examples. I'll give a couple of examples, and that will help you think of some examples where you've seen somebody. Krishna is teaching Arjuna here that doing duty as an example. Karma, the principles of karma yoga are what? Working as sacrifice, working as an offering, working as without attachment. And today Krishna is teaching us working as an example. Now I want you to think of some examples of personalities in your life or in the society where you've seen somebody working as an example or walking his talk. But I have seen many examples. Like I'll give an example. Those of you who are aware of history, any history buffs here? Second World War. Before Winston Churchill was elected, Winston Churchill is criticized a lot by Indians. So that aspect is there. I'm not dismissing that. But if you see from British perspective, Winston Churchill is a hero. So you need to understand what he did. Before he entered the scene, Chamberlain was the Prime Minister, and Britishers, England, people were very confused because Hitler, he had conquered France, Norway, Belgium, Netherlands, and when he took over France, Britain knew that they are next. And Hitler, he had this air force called Luftwaffe, I think that's how we pronounce. Twice the size of Royal Air Force of England. Twice the size. So, sabko laga, and Hermann Göring, the main Hitler's right-hand man, he was the chief of his air force. He kept assuring in 10 days, we are going to conquer Britain. So Britain was almost lost. And they started the airstrikes on their airfields. So now Winston Churchill becomes the Prime Minister. The morale is down. At that time, something interesting happens. 2.5 lakh soldiers are stuck. British soldiers are stuck in a place called Dunkirk, where the German forces have cornered them, and they are all going to be killed. That's like 70% of Britain's armed forces. So, और भी morale down है. And then Winston Churchill manages, with his ingenuity, to send all the small boats, and पूरा एक बड़ा exercise हो जाता है. Manages to get 90% of the soldiers back safe. And when all of them come back safe, people are like, wow, a human, the value of our people are important for us. ये एक message बहुत बड़ा चला गया. So when these people came back safe, people, our leader is good. And to top it, what Winston Churchill did, he was there with the people as Hitler was bombing London. So he refused to sleep they had a war room underground, and they had a very comfortable bedroom, comfortable facility for Winston Churchill and his family. But he refused to take rest there. He would stay in his 10 Downing Street office, home. So at least 5 or 6 times he had a close shave. But he would be there on the field with the people, with the common citizens of England. In fact, there are videos you'll find on YouTube where he is there with the fire brigade and with the people, helping people stuck in the debris, removing. So this people can see it, right? So your example speaks so loud that nobody hears what you say. So he was there, and in fact, inspired by him, the King and Queen of England, everybody in England said, you escape to Canada because Hitler's going to attack England. So you can't lose your King and Queen. That will be a great disgrace. The King and Queen refused to leave England. They stayed at Buckingham Palace. In fact, in one of the bombings, the royal guard of the palace also died. But the King and Queen didn't leave. Winston Churchill didn't leave. And people are seeing this. In fact, his wife got so panicky. The army chief told his wife that we've got, this spy secret information that tonight there's going to be 10 times more bombing by Luftwaffe. So you should insist that your husband, the Prime Minister, stays in the underground shelter. So she took a promise from her husband that tonight you're not going anywhere. You'll be staying here in our room here. You will sleep on this bed. So the war chief thought, let's see if Winston Churchill will be convinced by his wife. So he was surprised. In the night, Winston Churchill was in his pajamas, his nightgown, and he was in the bedroom. And he said, oh, sir, so you've agreed? Your wife has really convinced you? He said, yeah. So then the army chief went away. Winston Churchill went to the bedroom. After 5 minutes, he comes out, he calls him, and he says, come, let's go back to 10 Downing Street. He said, no, but you decided to stay. No, I promised my wife, so I slept on the bed for 5 minutes. I woke up, I followed the vow. So this news went viral, like people are seeing the Prime Minister is not using any of the facilities. So that lifted the morale. So despite being less than half of Luftwaffe, the way Britain fought back. And the best part was, Winston Churchill went to the RAF headquarters and their airfields, and he was there with the soldiers. The whole time in the war, he was doing that. Okay, na? Example is better than... So this is one example I am giving. There are many examples like this from history. You could give examples from your own family, in a group, or where either values have taken precedence over goals, or you've seen examples of leaders or men and women, which proves or which establishes Krishna's statement here that performing our duties as an example would leave footprints in the sands of time, in the annals of history, in the history. People would remember you. Like one more example I remember, this Uttarakhand tunnel, people were trapped. 40 workers were trapped. And look at the irony, just a few days before that, Australia defeated India in the World Cup finals. Indians were morose. And in that rescue operation, there were, I think, a couple of Australians also, and there's an Indian team. It was like Australia and India coming together to save 45. I think this news had captured the imagination of every Indian. Everybody was like, so I was asking in many of my programs, I would ask people, if you had a choice, in India wins the World Cup, India defeats Australia, but we lose these 40 men. Now we've got this 40 men. What would you prefer? अब दोनों चाहिए हमको. We want India to win also. But then I'm just saying, everywhere, humanity prevails. We're not really, we don't feel so fulfilled by achievement. That doesn't give us the dopamine kicks are not fulfilling. It's a thrill, but satisfaction is something deeper. Another example is Operation Ganga. Keeps politics aside. You know what is Operation Ganga? No, not cleaning of Ganga. Operation Ganga is one of the most, children, 22,500 children were stuck in Russia when Russia declared war on Ukraine. In Ukraine, they were stuck in Ukraine. 22,500 children. And Modi, Prime Minister was coming, he was in Uttar Pradesh and he gets this news and he's coming back to Delhi. So he sees, he's flying over Ganga. So he says, these children are as sacred to us as this river Ganga. And just like Ganga goes unhindered, reaches the ocean, we need to get our children back. So he says, let us call this operation as Operation Ganga. And then what he did was something very, very interesting and unique. It has never happened in Indian governance. Very unique what the Prime Minister did. I'm sure every Prime Minister has done good job. So I'm not talking about others. And for every good thing, I always keep politicians at an arm's length because I don't want to comment on any politics part of it. But जो अच्छा है तो अच्छा बोल देना चाहिए. So what happened? Something very unique the PM did. He sent 4 of his senior cabinet ministers. I think one was V.K. Singh, there was Kiran Rijiju, there was Jyotiraditya Scindia, one more fellow was there. All senior leaders, he sends them to this war zone, these 4 countries, neighboring countries, Ukraine, Slovak, Poland. He sends them there and he tells them, you will not come back. You will come back with the last plane. तब तक वापस नहीं आने का. I mean, so far ministers are never on the front. I mean, this is a unique PM and the ministers had to really pay for being the ministers. He made them work. So they were like, कभी ऐसा नहीं किया गया. So they were there and the PM would spend 5 to 6 hours every day in the Situation Room. So all his Vande Bharat inaugurations, all the other projects had to be, see again I'm saying this is goals versus values. Project को थोड़ा कम हो गया, कम नहीं होगा. Even during COVID, he announced a lockdown immediately. He said our people are more important. Although in retrospect we can say गलत था, सही था, that's another thing. But I'm just saying value क्या है आपका? Value को पकड़ो, success मिलेगा कभी. Sometimes we may achieve our goals, we may not achieve our goals. Like I couldn't achieve my target of 1,000 books. Sometimes I achieved, sometimes I did not achieve. But when I stick to my values, I'm satisfied. So he focused on, so he would be in the Situation Room 6 hours a day. And here, meanwhile, these 4 ministers, they went with this big letter to all these 4 prime ministers of Poland, Slovak, and other 2 countries, requesting them कि हमारे PM ने अब request किया है कि you create a facility for us to get the children from Ukraine. And all the 4 prime ministers, they were overwhelmed. They said, just before you came in to meet me, your prime minister called me personally. They are small countries, and for them to get a personal phone call from the PM was overwhelming for them. And they were like, Arey. But so they obviously gave whatever facility they wanted. But the most important thing that happened in this entire operation was Zelensky, is that how you pronounce? Zelensky and Putin. PM called both of them and he created what is called as a green corridor, human corridor, where 2 warring factions, they agree to stop fighting till the children are taken out. This never happened because war means you don't trust the enemy. Now here you are forced to trust the enemy and stop fighting till all the children are out. This is actually unprecedented. You go on Wikipedia and search human corridor, you'll hardly get any example. You'll only get the concept. Wikipedia is so researched, well researched. उसमें कुछ भी example नहीं मिलेगा आपको. 1-2 hardly मिलेगा. It requires statesmanship. It's more than politics. Because something is important for you. If your children are important for you, it's a value. And 22,500 children, we lost only 1 child. Only 1 boy was killed. और सबके सब जिंदा आ गए वापस. And not only that, I'm sorry for going on and on. Just this is an emphatic point. I just wanted to say this. All these 22,500 children were scattered all over India. The first thing the government did was the child, whichever district he was from in India, the local IAS officer, the district collector, would personally go to the house and assure the parent that the government will get your child back. See, parent, the biggest attachment is the child. For that's the first thing the government did. The district of IAS officer goes to the house. And the advisory they were giving repeated even 3 weeks before the war. So these Indian students are recalling how their classmates and their friends who are from other countries like England, Turkey, they are like shocked. They are saying, our country has not given any advisory. In fact, they told us you're on your own. No other country endeavored to get their children back. Nobody else did. In fact, they said you are on your own. And you know what happened in our Air India flights? Indigo, Air India, a few others. They were all getting children back. A few thousand Bangladeshi and Pakistani children are also called back. They were also brought back. In fact, Sheikh Hasina, she is the Prime Minister of Bangladesh. She was very gracious. She wrote a big letter acknowledging and appreciating. But Pakistan, not surprising, ungrateful. They didn't acknowledge and appreciate that, you know. So the PM said, children are children, you know. So जो भी आ रहे थे सबको लेके आए उठा के. वो बहुत बड़ा चीज किया. And at last 600 children were trapped in a small town called Simi. So there, interesting. There was a war was not between Russia and Ukraine. There was Russia, Ukraine, and also there was a third faction. There was a rebel group. They are fighting both Russian and Ukraine army. So now there's an exodus from this Simi. Everybody is leaving that city. And here the PM sends 2 top joint secretaries with his whole team to Simi to negotiate with these 3 factions to get our 600 children who were the last batch stuck. So these army guys, they're like, you guys are crazy. You are entering our country with your team and everybody is leaving. Why are you coming in? In fact, our children are stuck. You know how to get them. What children? You know, you're crazy. Get out of this place. But this team goes in, gets those 600 children. It's a big adventure in itself. So Operation Ganga is a classic testimony of this, of how values are more important than goals. I'm sure there are other examples also in other places. I'm just saying, I just took one example. I'm sure you will have better examples. And I've got many individual examples also. Maybe I can share later of Raj Gopalachari, Lal Bahadur Shastri, Radha Krishnan, and our Madhu Dandavate. I personally interacted with him. He was a railway minister and finance minister of India in the 1970s. I interacted with him in the early 1990s. So I've seen many of these leaders who led by example and who also followed this principle which Krishna is saying. Example is better than precept. In fact, one of my friends met the PM and he said something about this event. So the PM said he asked him about his election and political background or something. So the PM said a nice statement which hit me very hard. He said, हमारा उसूल है मेहनत इतनी खामोशी से करो कि कामयाबी शोर मचाए. I like that statement, you know. मेहनत खामोश. हम लोग क्या करते हैं? मेहनत शोर मचा के करते हैं. Anyway, that's another story. So I think you got the point. Values versus goals. So can you think of some examples where you saw values getting precedence over goals? Or where you saw examples being louder than precept? Is 5 minutes okay for discussion? Okay. So your time starts now. Hare Krishna. So any example anybody would like to share? Just one example from your group. Anything that you can want to share?
Yeah. After this, have you seen that? Loudly. थोड़ा जोर से बोलिए.
Okay. Not an outstanding one, but then the first thing that came to my mind was Srila Prabhupada, and his values was to bring in people into Krishna consciousness. But then, in spite of having to travel across the US with a lot of health issues, and I've heard that he's been hit with a lot of heart attacks during the travel, but they never went to any hospital or never got anything. But the value was basically to reach and basically follow his guru's words and bring in people to Krishna consciousness. That was one thing.
Yeah. We'll come back. One example from each group will take us. Thank you. Yes, Meghna. Yeah.
So I have actually a mentor who's taught me the work that I do in the Gita, the fund manager for a long time. He's with financial independence. For the last 3 years, whatever earning he gets, 100 out of 100 rupees, he gives to Gauseva. So he doesn't take a single rupee home. So whatever is his earnings for the last 3 years.
So how does he?
He does it. He's taken in charge 23 Patra poles in Srinagar. So all small Patra poles like Limri.
What about his livelihood if he's giving all his earnings?
He's got his own money.
Okay.
But whatever earning is coming to him,
He's
it's
giving
all
it
for
away.
Gauseva. So, and it goes into crops. So whatever, every rupee that he earns goes there.
It's not easy to. Yeah, thank you. So 2 of you have shared, 2 groups have shared, the other 3. Anybody else would like to share? Anyone here? Anything?
From our group, we had Radhanath Swamiji, his journey, how he kept to his values during his entire journey, even after facing so many difficulties, right? And he was at a very young age, and then finally he reached his goal. And then we had Veer Savarkar, his journey and how his values, even after being tortured so much, he never left his value and he still kept.
Thank you. Anybody else? Yeah.
So, the personality that comes on top of my mind is Mr. MS Dhoni. Everyone knows, the moment he got the captaincy, the first value that he got in the team was to, not thinking of the experienced people that we have in the team, but to give chance to the
Younger
ones, and then invite the value so that, use the growth.
Good example. Common example.
He's not thinking of the goals, the World Cup achievements and all, but he started the process wherein short-term values can lead to longer-term growth. That is,
Thank you for sharing. Anybody else? Any group who wants to share, not yet share? Yes.
It's one of my grandfather, late P.L. Sethi. It's related to the ISKCON temple, the Juhu one.
Your grandfather?
Yeah.
Oh, Sethi was your grandfather?
Yes.
Wow.
So
It's a legendary. अब बोलिए आपने सुनना है.
I think you will know it much better.
No, you tell us.
So the story is about the Juhu temple. First, so ISKCON had not officially got the land. So Prabhupada used to come meet Mr. Kamath and everybody, and then he said that he'll give the land to ISKCON, but he passed away. And then his wife was there, and somebody told the wife not to give the property to ISKCON. There was a big jhamela that was happening. But I think a small temple was already constructed, or a lot of foreigner devotees were also there. जो झोपड़े में रहते थे सब लोग. And my dadu used to come and give them whatever basic necessities, pani, khana, wana, and then aarti has to happen every day. And then they got some injunction from the court that आज रात को 12 बजे के पहले अगर ये मंदिर यहाँ से टूट जाएगा तो ये जगह ISKCON को नहीं मिलेगी. And then I think they had involved Shiv Sena and all those Gunda that also come. So a full gang came from there, and my dadu received the information कि ऐसा होने वाला है. So he got the message, and then he took his gun, he went over there, and it was raining very heavily. So He was there and my uncle was there and they stood with the gun and he said, "You want to break the temple? जो पहले आएगा मैं उसको गोली मारूंगा. So who wants to come and then you kill me." उसके पहले जब तक मंदिर नहीं टूटेगा, you are not going to get the land. And nobody dared, luckily, to come in the front and get killed. And तो 12 बजे and then my दादा said, "Please आरती करो." और फिर कोर्ट में establish हो गया कि the temple stands over there.
So Mr. Sethi is, I didn't know he's your grandfather. Amazed. I'm so amazed. He is a legendary personality in ISKCON. He's considered as, there are many heroes who are unsung heroes. Because there are many rank and file devotees who've really struggled hard. Many Western devotees, Americans, Germans, Europeans. We criticize many times Westerners, but if they were not in India, the kind of daring they had, the adventure spirit they had, they made these temples. And there are many Indians like Mr. Sethi here. He risked his life and he stood with his gun and he was saying, he challenged them because there was this Mrs. Nair. She actually Mr. Nair had cheated the devotees. He had taken the money from the devotees, but he didn't give the deed. So then the devotees moved in and then it was a long story. Some other day I'm going to share the whole story with you. So he thought Srila Prabhupada is an old man with a bunch of Americans who are naive. I can kick them out of the land. But he didn't know that Srila Prabhupada was a fighter and he had such highly spirited men like Mr. Sethi. So honored to meet you. So yeah, that's an amazing example. Thank you for sharing. Anybody else wants to share one last example before we chant 3 or 4 verses from this section? We couldn't chant today. Okay, we'll chant a couple of verses from this section, 70 to 35. There is one verse you can repeat after me. And who will read the translation after I read the verse? After we chant today. You will read the verse translation loudly? Okay. Please go to verse number 20 and repeat this verse after me. All of you have access to verse number 20, 3rd chapter. कर्मण्येवाहि संसिद्धिम् आस्थिता जनकादयः लोकसंग्रहमेवापि सम्पश्यन् कर्तुमर्हसि.
Kings such as Janaka attained perfection solely by performance of prescribed duties. Therefore, just for the sake of educating the people in general, you should perform your work.
So when I was reading this verse, I remembered Aranyakand from Ramayana, chapters 58 to 78. This is a section where Lord Ram is lamenting at the loss of Sita, who has been kidnapped by Ravana. At that point of time, Lord Ram doesn't know that Sita has been kidnapped and is frantically searching for her. And he goes berserk, he goes like crazy. And you can see complete human vulnerability and despair in Lord Ram's position there. And Lakshman counsels Lord Ram. So there are 9 counseling lessons I derived from that section when reading that section. And one of the last instructions Lakshman tells Lord Ram is this. He says, you should perform your duty. Don't be attached. Everybody is suffering. You're not the only one to suffer. So then he gives his very strong preaching he does. So he speaks exactly like how Krishna is speaking to Arjuna. Lakshman takes up the role of superior. And he scolds Lord Ram, says, how can you just get disoriented? You can't afford to. You are a king. You are a kshatriya. You have to set an example. So, very strong words. I was remembering that now. Okay, text 21. Yadyad acharati shreshthas tattad evetaro janaha sayat pramanam kurute lokastad anuvartate.
Whatever action a great man performs, common men follow. And whatever standards he sets by exemplary acts, all the world pursues.
Okay, if you take a couple of more verses. Text 22 also is very nice. Name partasti kartavyam Trishu lokeshu kinchana Nana vaptam avaptavyam Varta eva cha karmani.
O son of Partha, there is no work prescribed for me within all the three planetary systems, nor am I in want of anything, nor have I a need to obtain anything, and yet I am engaged in prescribed duties.
Yeah, we'll take 3 more verses, then we'll end. Go to text number 25 now. Okay, 26, sorry, 26. न बुद्धि भेदम जनयेद अज्ञानां कर्म संगिनां जोषयेत् सर्वकर्माणि विद्वान् युक्त समाचरन्.
So as not to disrupt the minds of ignorant men attached to the fruitive results of prescribed duties, a learned person should not induce them to stop work. Rather, by working in the spirit of devotion, he should engage them in all sorts of activities for the gradual development of Krishna consciousness.
Yeah. So there's also 2 more verses, very powerful. Actually, every verse in this section is so beautiful, but I'm just short of time. I'll just take 2 more. Okay, text 33. सदृशं चेष्टते स्वस्य प्रकृतेर्ज्ञानवानपि प्रकृतिं यान्ति भूतानि निग्रह किं करिष्यति.
Even a man of knowledge acts according to his own nature, for everyone follows the nature he has acquired from the 3 modes. What can repression accomplish?
Yes. Nigraham kim karishyati is a very powerful phrase. You can't suppress your nature. You have a certain nature. Because Arjuna was proposing, you'll go to the forest and become a beggar. So Krishna tells him, you won't be able to do that. You are a Kshatriya, you are an administrator. You go there and beg as a sadhu, but you will see some injustice there. You'll pick up your bow and you'll kill that person. And you'll behave exactly opposite of a sadhu. You can't do that. So the last verse I want to take now is text 35. Shreyan swadharma viguna paradharmat swanushtita swadharme nidanam shreyah paradharmo bhayavaha.
It is far better to discharge one's prescribed duties, even though faultily, than another's duties perfectly. Destruction in the course of performing one's own duty is better than engaging in another's duties. For to follow another's path is dangerous.
So Krishna is instructing him that you have been given certain guna, karma, nature, engage that in the Lord's service. So after this, Arjuna is his confusion goes away. He says, yes, Krishna, it all makes sense. But I have a doubt. I know what is right, but I am unable to do it. Why is that? And that's when Krishna speaks about the 4th topic of this 3rd chapter, which is lust, the enemy of every living being in this body, material body. We are conditioned by the energy of lust. So then he explains about lust, which we'll take up in the next section. Thank you very much. Hare Krishna. We'll have some comments or questions now for a few minutes. Hare Krishna. Yes, Baldev.
So just a doubt. You mentioned about the value and goals, and you gave that example of this man who works for 130 hours a week, right? So you mentioned that his priority might not be family, or maybe the relation of
No, he said,
time.
I know my value is my family. My family is most important for me. But his behavior, his actions are contrary to what his values are.
Right. Now, just to speak on his behalf, for example, he's working for the family only.
Yeah.
So sometimes there are these the dilemmas
That is called as classic dharma conflict. So dharma conflict is ethical dilemma. There are 2 right things to do. Moral dilemma is easy. Wrong and right. You know what to choose. But when there are 2 right things, that's what Lord Ram faced. Dharma conflict is all we all go through. Dharma sankat bolte na. And if somebody has not gone through dharma conflict, then you just not lived long enough. Just hang around for some more time. So that's a classic case where you learn through trial and error, you slip, you grow, you struggle, and then you come to the balance, the pendulum. Like, I met one man whose daughter is very sick now. And his daughter is very attached to him, and she is going through a sickness. So for which he needs to spend at least 5-6 hours with her every day. But now, if right now in his career is in a situation that if the next 3 years, if he puts in extra effort, if he works for 7-8 hours extra, something like that, for the rest of his life he doesn't have to work. So abhi wo aise situation में is asking me what should I do? I said, congratulations, you're in dharma sankat. I can't tell you what to do. So I go to US every year and I meet so many Indian families there. I stay with the Indian families. One of the common things is, Prabhu, my parents in India are calling me back. My wife and children want me to be here. And my standard answer is, get them here. No, they won't want to. They don't want to come. So what should I go back to India, or should I be here? Dharma conflict है. क्या करना है? क्या है? तो ये बहुत tough है यार.
What is the solution?
So,
How do we choose the better alternative?
How do we get the correct answer?
you know what? The answer to this how is by answering why. See, we're a generation that is obsessed with how. We want answers for everything. And that makes us control freaks. For many questions, we don't have an answer. How? How do I do this? Forget how. Why? Why do you want to be with your family? Why do you want an answer to this question? When you answer why, you are forced to go deeper. And if your why is clear, how will manifest on its own. And if you only look for how, then how keeps changing. Like I gave a class once in Borivali, and I gave a very emphatic class on chanting. How we should chant Hare Krishna. So then, and there I have a different culture. We begin the class with questions. That's how I used to do. And then after 10 minutes of question answer, then I would start the class. So the next week when I began the class, somebody said, last week you said we should all chant Hare Krishna, but how do we chant? So then I spoke for 10 minutes on how do we chant. And after that, so I spoke there about the principle of being mindful and attentive. For the next class, somebody said, how do we become mindful? So I said, mindful comes from sattva practices. Sattva practices are life in the mode of goodness and all of that. So the following week, somebody said, how do we live sattva lifestyle? So then I spoke about breathing. Breathing as a very common technique. I speak about breathing many times. Today we couldn't do that exercise. So then he said, okay, the next week somebody said, but it's very difficult to do this conscious breathing because our life is very fast. So how do we do conscious breathing practices? उसके ऊपर डिस्कशन हुआ. So there I remember explaining to them that ये सब ना कुछ काम नहीं करेगा. आप भगवान का नाम लो, chanting करो. And then the following week somebody said, you spoke about chanting, how to chant. आप देख रहे हो क्या हो रहा है? How का end ही नहीं है. You come back to the same thing eventually. You go on YouTube, you will get answers for everything. How to overcome YouTube addiction. वो भी YouTube में मिलेगा. But still, so yeah, there has to be some solution. But there are some things you learn in your own journey. You evolve. You learn. You can't. Like for example, how to use a smartphone. It took me 3-4 years how to use this damn thing. I need this for my services. But I realized one day when I got this smartphone for the first time in 2014 or something, I realized I'm spending an inordinate amount of time on this. Although we have all the security, parental apps and all of that, that's all nice, but there is something in these electronic images which keeps you hooked. So then I said, hey, bilkul use nahi karenge. Then I saw my services were getting affected. Use kya to time. So then by trial and error, now I have got a very good last few years. I'm like a self-realized yogi in terms of I know how much to use, when to use. I keep the phone off for the most of the time. And when now it's off actually right now. दिन में 2 बार open होता है. I check my messages. So you learn by trial and error. If somebody had given me the formula, it would have not worked because it was not mine. I asked serious questions. Why? Why I don't want to spend time on the phone? Why? Because time is precious for me. I've given my life for Krishna. I want to serve. So when that why was burning, then this automatically happened. So that's my answer to how.
So what's the difference between dharma and apat dharma?
Apat dharma, you would like to elaborate on it?
Actually,
Dharma during emergency. Yeah. Dharma during emergency. आपातकाल में. Yeah, emergency में होता है. Like for example, right now we are not in a war situation, so we are all comfortable. So right now we can talk about a lot of issues like gender equality. We can have a lot of discussions on, like when I was in US last year, they spoke about 74 types of gender. So I knew men, women and eunuchs, but they were saying, nahi, there are men who think I am a woman today and women who think all those 74 types. So I was like, okay. But then they're saying, what are your views on this? I did some programs in different places. Then I said this, ये सब ना अभी चल रहा है क्योंकि आप लोग comfortable हो. Let there be a war. Then everybody will restrict themselves to the gender specific. जो natural है ना, a woman would give nurturing, a man would be out there fighting. सब अपना जो psychophysical वर्णा है उसके हिसाब से जिएंगे. So apat dharma is sometimes in emergency people have to play different roles. Like in Mahabharata we have Brahmanas doing Kshatriya role, Kshatriyas doing Brahmana role. But that is a very complicated subject. That's why I don't. Mahabharata से stories बोलता हूँ, but Mahabharata के जो dharma principles I don't get into it. So yeah.
There's nothing related to Dharma Sankat.
No, Dharma Sankat is different. Dharma Sankat I'm talking about is when two right choices you have and you're confused.
So it's a kind of catch-22.
Yeah, catch-22. See, I'll tell you the essence of Vedic wisdom is what? These problems will go on. Confusions will always happen. You just focus on an aspiration higher than the everyday का जो जिंदगी है उससे ऊपर थोड़ा उठ. Every day we are leading our life. We have our duties and responsibilities. But there's something higher than that. Focus on that. Seek something higher than eating, sleeping, meeting and defending. And then eventually these things will also sort out. And all traditions speak about it. Like, our Bhagavatam, I can quote hundreds of verses on this principle of rise beyond eating, sleeping, mating and defending. Mahabharata speaks about it. But even in modern evolved traditions, like, Muhammad Iqbal, India, Pakistan's national poet, and सारे जहाँ से अच्छा जिसने लिखा है. So I read his poetry sometimes, very profound. I don't remember the whole thing now. There's one place where he writes, मंजिलों से आगे बढ़कर मंजिल तलाश कर. मंजिलों से आगे बढ़कर मंजिल तलाश कर. Very, very. So there he says, मंजिल से आगे बढ़कर मंजिल तलाश कर, मिल जाए तुझको दरिया तो समुंदर तलाश कर. हर शीशा टूट जाता है पत्थर की चोट से, पत्थर ही टूट जाए वो शीशा तलाश कर. So that means, so even if you see, even John Stuart Mill, I read his some letters I was reading as part of our New Bhakta training course. So there he says one statement. He says, better to be a very powerful statement he writes, which is so similar, it resonates with entirely what Bhagavatam says. Srimad Bhagavatam says, he says, it is better to be a dissatisfied human being than a satisfied pig. Better to be an unsuccessful Socrates than a successful fool. So basically you have an aspiration and you're trying, you're struggling. That is better. क्योंकि ultimately दुनिया में आप कुछ भी कमाओ, कुछ भी करो, ultimately सब, that the Italian proverb goes, at the end of the game, both king and the pawn lie in the same box. हम लोग सब. So let us be honest, let us be congruent, let us live according to values, and let us live in harmony with the universal principles. So Muhammad Iqbal also says, बख्श देता है खुदा उनको जिनकी किस्मत खराब होती है. बख्श देता है खुदा उनको जिनकी किस्मत खराब होती है, वो हरगिज बख्शे नहीं जाते जिनकी नीयत खराब होती है. Powerful, na? And then he says, the next line is very powerful. He says, न मेरा एक होगा, न तेरा लाख होगा, न तारीफ तेरी होगी, न मजाक मेरा होगा. गुरूर न कर इस शान शौकत शरीर पर, मेरा भी खाक होगा, तेरा भी खाक होगा. So this is life. We sometimes get overwhelmed by our situation and circumstances. We don't realize that ultimately, the Bhagavad Gita, spiritual life means to understand that ये सब नश्वर है. But if you speak about it, then people go to the other extreme, then they practice what is called as spiritual bypass. They hide and they deny their real reality by just holding on to spiritual path as a crutch. They're not actually evolved. So we don't want that to happen. So we also address their day-to-day problem. But at some point of time, we need to understand that we need to transcend this. So that's how we see it. Is that okay? Oh yeah. Repression accomplish. That is desire. There's a difference between nature and desire. See, so your nature may be a teacher or a businessman. Your desires is vasana. Nature is dharma. Vasana, the desires, see, again, desires is a strategy we use to take care of our needs, which is part of our dharma. Like, for example, eating healthy food is a need. But I want to eat chocolate and pizza every day. That's a desire. Need for love is a need. Sex is a desire. Physical activity, health, sports, yoga. I want to be healthy, do exercise. That's a need. But I want to play football only every day. Kuch nahi, football hi khelna. That is a desire. So Bhagavad Gita says desires ko, you will find later on 6th chapter, very strong, how to overcome our negative desires, unhealthy desires. There Krishna doesn't say, what will repression accomplish. Here he's talking about nature. Nature ko hum change nahi kar sakte. In fact, the last class we discussed how Krishna says, in the 2nd chapter, Srila Prabhupada writes, a sincere sweeper in the street is better than a shortened meditator. Krishna also says in the last class, he speaks in the 3rd chapter, the first few verses, Mityacharasa uchyate, yaste manasa smaran. One who is meditating on sense objects and enjoyment, but externally is in the garb of a renunciant, is a pretender. And Mityachar is a very strong word, hypocrisy. Many times Krishna calls many people as fools in the Gita. Muda, Vimuda, fools and rascals Krishna uses many times. But only once he uses hypocrite. Because hypocrite is one who cheats. So fool is cheating, deluding himself. But hypocrite is one who cheats others. So desires when uncontrolled, we will read the next section. 36 to 43 is all about unhealthy desires. So when Krishna is saying what will repression accomplish, he's not talking about... he's not saying that, okay, enjoy your desires. No, he's talking about your nature. Is that okay? Shall we stop here? It's 5:55. We'll have some Kirtan now, and I hope to see you again. When is the date? Next class? Next class, we will have the last section of the 3rd chapter. 21st of April. Please come. Hare Krishna. Thank you very much. Hare Krishna. Now we'll have Kirtan.